Joining us for some further insight and analysis on that question, very pleased to welcome to the program here Cole Hogan. He's a conservative political strategist, also a pundit, commentator. His website is colehogan.ca. Cole, so great to have you with us here. Welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me.
I guess right now the big issue or the big talking point has been the floor crossings. Two at this point. Rumors maybe there's more. There, of course, was a third who was supposedly considering crossing. He's just decided to resign from politics altogether. So how much of this has kind of changed the conversation or become the big talking point around the leader, first of all?
Yeah, I think it's become a big conversation for a few reasons. One in particular, because Mark Carney might get a majority election without having gone to the people for it. And we've seen Pierre Poilievre in his year-end interviews point to that as something that the Canadian people wouldn't want or acknowledge. And I think there's some truth to that. I think we've seen with conservative claims of coalitions taking power when they did not earn it, trying to win when they lost. Would there be a similar sort of public sentiment around that? So I think that we'd see some negative reaction if that's how they gained a majority government. With additional floor crossers potentially happening, I think here in Ottawa in particular, that's a conversation that seems to be taking place where everyone appears to think that it's going to be inevitable to some degree. And I think that's potentially what's going to happen, because they can offer Mark Carney a majority government, and they can offer that person a cabinet spot. So the most enticing thing in politics is immediate power, and that's what a potential conservative floor crosser would get. Would they be respected by voters for doing so? I don't think so.
Well, that's the thing. And I mean, I think going into the last election, or certainly in the months leading up to the last election, there was a sense of inevitability that there was going to be a conservative government. So you do wonder if then there were some who ran as conservatives expecting to be in government and would much prefer to be in government than in opposition. You know, as much as the narrative has kind of been built around questions around Poilievre's leadership, at the same time, I mean, we shouldn't let the floor crossers off the hook, I don't think, either. What are we to make of what we've seen here in recent days?
Well, my opinion has been that the people that have crossed the floor have done so not on political principle, but on the fact they just want to be in government. These are people who have jettisoned what appeared to be, deeply held conservative principles and political values, and then, at the first offer of power, potentially a cabinet spot, they jump ship. I think voters in Markham Unionville and in Chris Donchemont's riding in Nova Scotia, I think they're going to have to, well, one, I would imagine that, if they're acclaimed, I imagine the local organizers on the Liberal side would be kind of upset that their Liberal candidate doesn't get to run in that spot and someone who crossed the floor does. So that presents a local difficulty for them. And even then, if they do win their local nomination, they have to go back to the voters and say, hey, remember all that stuff I said? Turns out I didn't mean it.
Right. It seems like less of a jump, though, than it would have been under, a Trudeau-led Liberal Party. And I think, Pierre Poilievre has rightly made the case that Mark Carney and his Liberals are maybe copying or stealing to some extent conservative policy, or realizing maybe where the Conservatives were on more popular ground on certain policies. So how much of that is a factor then in how things have changed under Mark Carney?
Well, I think it remains to be seen. We've seen some interesting stuff in terms of the Alberta-Ottawa MOU was a significant success, I think, for Mark Carney and Premier Danielle Smith. And I think they're both approaching that project earnestly. But we've seen a couple of things here that are sort of an assessment of where Mark Carney is actually going. The Alberta-Ottawa MOU indicates a more friendly relationship with Alberta. Alberta certainly got a lot of concessions out of Ottawa to begin the beginning of this negotiation and agreement. But then there's been some resistance within the Liberal caucus based on the new alleged support for pipelines and the major projects generally. We've seen Stephen Guilbeault say, no more, I've had enough. This has gone too far from the Trudeau years. I'm out of here. A lot of BC MPs in the Liberal Party, have voiced their expression and their discontent with seeing pipeline projects be promised. So now, the floor crossers might be like, okay, I can see myself potentially in a Mark Carney government, but what exactly does the Liberal Party look like under Mark Carney? Is it pro-energy? We haven't seen, Dominic LeBlanc, Tim Hodgson, Mark Carney have not had emphatic statements of, yes, I want this pipeline to happen. And we've also seen the environmental side say that they don't want it to happen. So floor crossers, I don't think, have a definitive answer, but they know power's on the immediate on the other side. And I think that's what motivates them more than anything.
Well, and I think, as you allude to, there is some dissent or discontent on the liberal side of things, and even if they're successful in bringing over some floor crossers, they could still lose a few MPs, I think, too. So, there is that side of it. Do you think that the dissent in on the conservative side is getting more focus or more scrutiny than some of the dissent on the liberal side?
Well, the way that I'm looking at this is there is still, and a lot of people have made this point. Pierre did have quite a resounding success, even though he didn't form government in the last election, by getting to 41%. That's usually a majority government for any political party, and that's the point at which that's where Pierre Poilievre has elevated the Conservative Party to. That's a lot of new voters in Southern Ontario, voters in BC that weren't accessible to Erin O'Toole and weren't accessible to Andrew Scheer. So I think the Conservative caucus sees that. But I think that's, on the Liberal side, what they're trying to sell is sort of like an instant pass into government. Like, oh, I know it must suck that you weren't able to form government, but you can join government immediately here, and that's enticing to some folks who maybe aren't that attached to conservative principles. But to answer your question, on the conservative side, there are those. We were 25 points up in the polls. This was our election to win, and then circumstances changed drastically. So there may be some conservatives that are upset about that, but most of the people that I talk to are in it for the long haul with the party.
Now, look, if the Liberals can get to a majority, and that would sort of lock in their position for the next few years, I think that would be a disappointment and frustration to a lot of Conservatives in Canada. Do you think that impacts the leadership review? I mean, the timing of all of this is interesting, but how much of a setback would it be for Pierre Poilievre if the Liberals are able to cobble together a majority?
I think it depends on the public reaction. If the public is, okay with floor crossing, and, there's been 300 across Canada's history. Floor crossing is not a new thing, but forming a majority government out of floor crossers is a new thing. Would Canadians be satisfied with that happening? And what does it speak to more? Does it speak to discontent with the Conservative Party and the conservative message generally, or does it speak to people who, Liberals who just thought it would be a good idea to openly campaign against or for Conservatives to join the Liberal Party to get what they could not get at the ballot box?
Yeah, I as you say, I mean, if it's viewed as sort of a cynical ploy, that could, in a way, backfire on the Liberals. So the position Pierre Poilievre finds himself in, again, I mean, a pretty historically high vote for the Conservatives in this election, but still, I mean, losing his seat and having to go through all of that, and now these challenges now, and some of these voices out there, and I don't know how many Conservatives they speak for, those suggesting maybe it's time for somebody else, or maybe Pierre Poilievre is kind of nearing the end here. What do you make of those voices, and do they have any credibility, do you think, amongst Conservatives?
I don't think they have any credibility among Conservatives, because if I look at the last, almost 4 years now since Pierre Poilievre became leader of the Conservative Party, this guy has defined the political issue matrix for the majority of those 4 years. He was way ahead on inflation, immigration, cost of living, affordability, housing. So they see Pierre's political ability to do that and control, the major political conversations, so much so that at the tail end of the Trudeau government, they were mostly reacting to the things that Pierre was leading on. And now the way that Mark Carney is governing is broadly affected by the issues that Pierre Poilievre is leading on, minus, the talk of Trump and trade and tariffs. So I think that the membership looks at Pierre Poilievre and say, look, like, these floor crossings are not indicative of, the conservative movement broadly. I think they've actually battened down the hatches on the conservative movement, where they're like, all right, now we're purified in a sense, and we know that the remaining people left are those who are fully whole square behind the conservative movement. So I think that while the floor crossing is not great, you never want to see it happen. I do think that there are those who know that the Conservative Party is closer than ever to government, and now's not the time to just switch teams.
Well, the other thing is who else is out there? I mean, for one, it doesn't seem like anyone's angling to take out Pierre Poilievre. There's no obvious, success for anyone out there with big leadership ambitions. I suppose if Pierre Poilievre were to lose or walk away, that I'm sure there would be those willing to step up. But even you look at polls, that there doesn't seem to be a conservative that polls better than Pierre Poilievre, and to be able to keep together the big tent, as it were, to the extent that he has. I mean, who else is out there?
No, that there isn't really anyone that can hold a candle to Pierre in terms of the success that he's made electorally and broadening the wider conservative tent and appeal. Excuse me. In fact, there's been the Abacus did a poll in which it showed, conservative success with different leaders against Mark Carney. They had Jason Kenney, Doug Ford, Caroline Mulroney, everyone in that list, and Pierre outperformed all of them. So I think that, on the Liberal side, it appears that the Liberal end of year message has been that Pierre Poilievre has to go, and we've seen a few op-eds there, but all evidence points towards the contrary. I think Pierre Poilievre is the best conservative leader we have to actually defeat Mark Carney, and the Liberals know this too, because the Liberals actually won this last election by the skin of their teeth, a very slim minority, and conservatives are closer than ever. Like if Carney can't deliver on Trump and tariffs, if he actually makes no success with major projects, if the economy and cost of living is not addressed, like those are the last vestiges of what the Liberal Party had to run on. In the Trudeau years, there was no issue on which Trudeau actually led ahead of Poilievre, except for the environment. Now Trump is maybe the sixth most important issue to Canadians. If that keeps dropping and Carney can't deliver any success on Trump and tariffs, conservatives have the advantage on a multitude of issues that can take them into a potential win in the next election.
Yeah, I think it's an important point. I mean, I get the argument that in a way, Pierre Poilievre was almost too effective as conservative leader. He drove Trudeau out of office, convinced the Liberals to pivot on a lot of issues. They finally realized just how out of touch they were on some of these issues. But it's not as though all of those concerns have gone away. Affordability remains a top concern. I think you pointed to some other areas of vulnerability. So there's still a lot here, I think, for the Conservatives to lead on. What do you see as these issues then as we head into next year?
Sure. So, we have the Kuzma negotiations coming up next year. I think that'll be first and foremost. And we've seen some recent reports on, Canada's population levels due to a decrease in non-permanent residents. Groceries are still hundreds of dollars. Rent in many Canadian cities is still $2,000 plus, $2,500 if you're in Toronto or Vancouver. The cost of buying a house for a millennial or anyone in that general age range, it's $250,000 for a down payment on a $1.1 million house. If young Canadians in particular don't see any change on these issues, I think it creates a real problem for the Liberal Party, because we see young Canadians in particular, let's say like 25 to 50, are overwhelmingly conservative right now because they're the ones that have been most affected by these policies. So I think in 2026, the party that can lead and speak to those issues the most, especially if nothing happens on the majority of them, that's who has the political advantage in the new year.
We'll see what happens next month in Calgary, and of course, where things go in federal politics over the next few weeks and months. Cole Hogan, appreciate your insight and input on this. Thank you so much for making some time for us here.
Thanks, Rob.